Welcome to the Bill Moran Show on WVLP LP 103.1 FM and streaming live at WVLP.org or on your TuneIn app. We are broadcasting live from the historic 1 Center Street building in beautiful Valparaiso, Indiana. The Bill Moran Show is underwritten by Recovery Works of Maryville, Indiana. And now, here is your host, Bill Moran.
Welcome to the Bill Moran Show on WVLP LP 103.1 FM. Our show discusses people, news, and events in the Chicago area. We also hold timely panel discussions on such topics as substance abuse, domestic violence, sexual aggression, and as today's topic will be over school security. We have brought together elected officials, citizens, to discuss issues that have an impact on our community. Our purpose is to discuss solutions that could support a vibrant community as well as our communal and economic growth. So we would like to welcome you to the Bill Moran Show today. As I stated, we have a very timely and very important topic that we have decided to do a panel discussion on. And to give you an idea about how we're going to format a lot of this, this is going to be a little bit different than our usual panel discussions, but not much. We are going to divide this into 3 separate sections. And one of the things I will urge all of you that are listening today, I know there's some very emotional topics out there having to do with gun control and then also school security and some of the things about hardening the target, if you will. We are going to try to avoid some of those topics because those are things that ride outside of the issues that we're going to talk about. Primarily what our guests are invited here today, which I'll introduce here shortly, is to discuss things that are happening within the schools today. Issues that are happening today outside of this controversial realm that's happening outside of us over whether we should have teachers have guns or whether there should be tighter gun control. All of we agree and respect the opinions of many that there's something that needs to be done. But again, what we are going to do is draw back and look at what can be done within the schools and the impact that is happening, again, that can cause better, I guess the environment is the word I'm looking for. So with that, I'm going to invite our guest and welcome him today. And of course, the first guest was no stranger to our show because he's been on both, you've been on the Recovery Radio Show, and that's Todd Willis, who's Porter Starke, counselor at Porter Starke. Welcome, Todd.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for inviting me back.
We're very pleased to have you here, and Todd's here to look at some of the mental health issues that are facing adolescents today, and we'll be able to chime in on that. And then, of course, we have Stephenson, is that correct? Did I get that right? Stephenson. I always butcher last name, so I apologize. And she's with the Porter County Substance Abuse Council. And of course, we'll be addressing some issues that we feel are bleeding over into both mental health and an outcome of that is sometimes substance abuse. So she'll be speaking with that today. And of course, an old-time friend of mine, Denise Koebcke, who is with Valparaiso Community Schools. She is the leader of Project LEAD, and also, boy, I tell you, I looked at the website and it's like, hold it, where does your title end?
It's a pretty long title.
Pretty long, and let me see.
Big job.
So she's with Valparaiso Community Schools, and I've known her. We've worked together for 20 years, and I was also a CAS mentor when it was called CAS. But she is in charge of the Project LEAD program, and also is a program director for the Student Leadership and Climate Coordinator. Is that
right?
Correct?
I'm the district student leadership / climate coordinator, but a lot of people know about Team LEAD, which is our lead mentor program. So that's a big part of what we do.
Right. So in this three-part discussion, what we would think that we would start off first is looking at the impact. What school environment looks like now. What is our society's impact on adolescents? These poor guys, they're going to school. They should feel safe, but and I think we all know it now with the media and the controversial discussions happening out there. Do they? And we'll get to that in a moment. I would like to open up the panel, first of all, with the first question, and that is, from all your perspective backgrounds, can you tell us what is happening with adolescents today, be it the impact that they're having through just the environmental factors? And Todd, we'll start with you first.
Sure. So as far as adolescence and mental illness, that's always been a piece that's been in existence. I mean, mental health and mental health issues have existed since the dawn of time. But I think there's some factors that are happening right now in our culture that are exacerbating those, not just for adolescents, but adults as well. Particularly, what the research points to is that if you're going to have a diagnosable mental illness, that 60% of people have that happen to them in adolescence. Not to say that adults can't struggle with depression and those things, but if you're going to have a diagnosable issue, you can trace that back to the teen years. And you've got to start asking yourself why that's the case. I think now there is a lot more trauma that's happening in our culture that kids and teens are having to deal with. And in general, there's a real lack of connectedness with human beings that's in our culture that I think is causing a lot more mental illnesses to come up in folks. So two big changes, I would say. We see increases in mental illness, particularly mental illness and addiction as it relates to teens. And I would point that to a world that's filled with additional traumas that maybe we didn't have in our face and overexposed to back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And then two, a real lack of connectedness. And that you should be asking yourself, well, how is that possible with all kinds of social media, which I hope we get to at some point. But lack of connectedness and increased exposure to trauma.
I have to date back to when I was a kid, and I knew some of the worries that I had before Gary started changing. All my friends got all these nice skateboards, the nice polished up skateboards that were oval and nice bearings. My dad took a 2x4 and put my sister's old skates on the bottom of it, and that was boy, I tell you, every time I brought that out, the pressure and the abuse that I took from my peers. But fast forward, oh my gosh, what has happened? Kids have so many things that they have to concern themselves with, how they are viewed by their peers, and
absolutely.
Then you roll that into social media. So now I look back at my 2x4 skateboard that I had, and I feel fortunate that I have that compared to what's going on. A simplistic way of looking at the world.
So, Bill, you touch on just the resources also, and how kids can be engaged in different kind of positive things. So I was looking at some statistics from the Mental Health America site, which is a large organization that looks at this, and they did some research that looked at about 7 factors, particularly with youth, and it ranked all of our states based on the number of youth that have diagnosable issues at any point in their life and the availability of resources. Now, here's what I'm getting at. Indiana ranked out of 51. Okay, so that's our states with District of Columbia. Indiana ranked 34. And so what that suggests is that there is a high number in Indiana of adolescents that have diagnosable issues and are not able to get the treatment that they need to have recovery happen for them in the mental health world. And we haven't even started talking about addiction. That doesn't speak well to Indiana. When you look at some of the factors of some of these tragedies that have happened in other states, if I were to show you the entire list, out of 51, we know some things happened in Florida. Florida was 41. Lower on the list suggests higher rates of mental illness and less available services. So it's something for our state to really look at, the availability to get these kids help.
That very research, Bill, is something that we're really looking at with our Culture and Student Services team because, as Todd said, the availability of help in Indiana is pretty low, but Indiana has some of the highest rates of youth suicide and those sorts of things. So what we're trying to do in our school system is fill that gap because all of our kids, you talk about trauma, really all of our kids are at risk today. We used to talk in schools about at-risk kids, and today all of our kids are at risk because of the huge impact. There's so much sad shock and trauma today for our kids, and the anxiety levels of our kids compared to, say, when we were kids are 4, 5, 6 times higher than what we grew up with, simply because of the climate we live in. So we've really worked on pulling in pieces to fill that gap and working on building hope, help, and strength for our kids and sources of strength. Because the number one impact on our kids today, number one influence is the media, number 2, peers, number 3, parents. You know, we need to get that hope, help, and strength there for our kids because the sad shock trauma makes them feel helpless, and then you have the self-medicating and the suicidal ideation, that sort of stuff. So we have to bring our kids hope and strength.
Right.
Absolutely.
And you know, as we move along, we'll be discussing a lot of those issues. But in between some of our panelists' response, what I hope to do is share some statistics as well, but I'm going to go ahead and allow you all to complete the first question. Stephanie, we're going to move on to you.
Okay, thank you. We see at Porter County Substance Abuse Council, we are a prevention awareness place. We go into schools, we get phone calls. When we go into schools, we do focus groups, and so we ask different age groups, different groups of classes, questions about marijuana, about heroin, about different drugs. They give us very honest answers, and what we see also is an anxiety from kids. We also get a lot of phone calls to our office because we sell drug kits and parents want to know that. We advertise that we sell drug kits. But we get a lot of places, $5 drug kits.
$5 drug kits.
We get a lot of phone calls of people asking for help, and we just don't have the places to send them. We give them a resource, and we give them phone numbers, but it's just very hard because a lot are on Medicaid, and then they don't take Medicaid, and the help just isn't there, and some of the phone calls are just heart-wrenching.
I bet, especially in this environment where Porter County's number one problem is substance abuse right now.
Right.
And so that's, and this could be a byproduct of what's happening in our society. Yes. So, Denise, my old friend, it's your turn.
Yes. Well, as I'm listening, the lack of resources, the lack of care, and the heavy need, and that's where we feel like in our school system we need to jump in there and try to fill that need to the best of our ability. So we're trying to pull in the best practices in substance abuse prevention, suicide prevention, and like sources of strength and some of the mind up and mindset work sorts of things, and really key in on the 3 biggest protective factors for kids, which is authoritative schools and families, connectedness, as you've said, and as Todd has said multiple times, and a higher purpose. That's the missing link oftentimes that schools don't address. And so what we try to do is build safety nets by creating a framework for kids of student leadership and student empowerment. We had our mentors, our high school mentors, for instance, put in over 2,000 hours of community service and last year alone. So we are just creating a framework from elementary all the way through high school where we're giving kids opportunities to connect and then serve the community. And our community has jumped in amazing ways. We've partnered with Stephanie Stephenson and PCYF and lots of local agencies, Memorial Opera House, all sorts of places to give our kids that connection to the community and opportunities to serve because it makes them healthier.
So, Bill, one of the things you're hearing, and I hope your listeners are hearing, is that to tackle this problem, not just with teenagers, but with our entire communities, it takes partnerships. It takes schools calling mental health folks and saying, hey, will you partner with us so that we can adequately address our needs in the schools? It takes unique partnerships with other non-service providing agencies. You heard Memorial House, to really come together and give kids some healthy alternatives and healthy lifestyle choices.
Right. And one of the things that I think I shared with you all before we went on the air is the analogy comparing our society today to Mayberry. And Mayberry to New York. Okay, my friends out there from New York, please don't hold us against me, but you got to agree. There's certain isolationist trends that happen in New York. They're all vying for the same space. And, you know, Mayberry, for those of you who are familiar with the Andy Griffith Show, it was a sheriff without a gun. It kind of reminds me of Dave Reynolds in a way. Yeah, Dave's a little bit more forward, though. But if you look at that, you know, and how Andy dealt with the problems in Mayberry, you know, in fact, I just saw an episode where he said that, you know, it's appropriate for strangers in the community to warn them once before they are actually incarcerated. And, you know, it was that community where everyone knew each other and were supportive that I think we agree we're all lacking today. And that's his problem type of, or her problem. And so with that, I am going to share some, and I purposely did not want to restate news that we all know, and so I'm going to spare you from some of that news, but I can't spare you with some of the alarming statistics. So I, again, as we like to do is go back and look at statistics. And so I went to look at the CDC, some of the things that they had recorded in a report. And again, this has not been updated. This is from 2016. So as you can imagine, these numbers are somewhat larger. So there were 31 homicides of school-age youth ages 5 to 18 years that occurred at school during the years 2012 to 2013, and that's in the United States. And as you can imagine with what's happened now, you can just do the math. Disheartening. Of all youth homicides, less than 2.6% occur at school. Now, I've got to warn you again, that percentage has probably risen a bit, but again, you know, we're living in a society where no one is isolated from violence. And you have to begin to wonder what are the causes of that. Approximately 9% of the teachers report, so we've talked about students and adolescents, but we can't forget in these buildings are the people that are responsible for their well-being and their education. The teachers report that they have been threatened with injury by a student from their school. 5% of school teachers reported that they had been physically attacked by a student from their school. And in 2013, 12% of the students ages 12 to 18 reported that gangs were present at their school during the school year. So I'll give snippets of this as we go along. But I want to move on. First of all, we are going to have to take a break. So if you all will bear with me, and we'll be back shortly, but we have to do a break at the half hour. Be back with you in about a minute.
You are listening to The Bill Moran Show on WVLP LP 103.1 FM and streaming live at WVLP.org or on your TuneIn app. We are broadcasting live from the historic 1 Center Street building in beautiful Valparaiso, Indiana. The Bill Moran Show is underwritten by Recovery Works of Maryville, Indiana. If you or a loved one are struggling with a drug or alcohol problem, please call us at 866-535-4673. Now, back to your host, Bill Moran.
Welcome back. And so we want to move on from there. We come to our second question. And this is kind of an age-old question, unfortunately. 20 years ago we were discussing it. Here we are today. It still has a big impact, not only on adolescents, but adults. And that is that dreaded social media. What was supposed to make us more connected, in a way, has put us more at risk. So I'd like to go around the horn again and just have you all chime in and what your opinions are and what you're seeing as an outcome of, the use of social media by adolescents. Todd, we'll start with you.
I'll try to keep this brief, but this is a strong passion that I have, and have done a lot of research in this area. Social media is not a bad thing. There are many positive things that come from social media. What we're finding, though, is that as a whole, social media is relatively not researched a lot. It's new, but they're starting to look at it. And what they're finding, although there are some positive pieces to it, used in moderation, there are some negative side effects to that. One being is that they're looking at, sites like Facebook, Instagram, as really doing some psychological damage to people. Well, how is that possible, you might ask? Well, they're looking at, Facebook, I always have joked, should be called Fakebook, because nobody puts true stuff, their real life, on Facebook. We put our best pictures, we put our best scenes, we put our fancy quip sayings, and what that tends to do is they've looked at it with adolescents, and it tends to lead to higher depression rates. There was a study, I believe, out of Auburn University. I'm certain on that. I wasn't prepared to talk about it; just came to my mind. But that they looked at a correlation between teenagers. The more time that they spend on social media, the higher their levels of depression are. I read a study recently about one of the most unhealthy social media sites was Instagram, because really all you're getting in Instagram is pictures. And you see the best of people when they look their best for a small amount of time. And it really has led to what we're finding is high levels of depression and anxiety in people. Not to mention the brain changes, organic brain changes that happen from the dopamine spikes that we get from social media. It can be potentially damaging, Bill.
And Stephanie?
I was in a school yesterday, and we were asking them about social media, and Facebook is old news for kids in middle school, high school. They don't like that because their mothers are on that, or parents. But Instagram is the big one that they use, they told us. We're trying to keep up on that, but it is so ever-changing, so quickly changing. But I see the kids just... it's too much. They see too much on it with the pictures and the up-to-date information that isn't necessarily good for them.
I saw a statistic, and this might be a little dated. It was in 2014, that talked about the top 5 reasons stated for divorces among adults. Mm-hmm. Facebook was number 3.
Oh my God.
And so what you find is a lot of unhealthy relationships get rekindled, if you will, from connecting with folks. So all kinds of interesting stuff there.
And I find too that there's no emotion in it. Like one time there was a little misunderstanding with my son and another person on some social media, and I said, you've got to relook at, call them and find out what's going on, because it wasn't clear and didn't have the emotion, the personal touch.
Denise?
I do have a vast wealth of information in this topic, working with middle schoolers and high schools in particular. But as Todd noted, it's not just the kids who have increased depression rates and that sort of thing from social media. Many adults. There was a 65-year-old woman who said to me from Facebook, well, why doesn't everybody likes your stuff more? Why isn't somebody liking mine? Why aren't you on there liking my stuff? And so it impacts the parents of the kids as well. But the kids don't use Facebook. The kids use Instagram, chat. It's much more visual. It's much quicker. They are 24/7 connected, which I see as one of the biggest problems because that, removes them from their families so often. It's why it is so important for us as adults and human beings to take any opportunity we have to make eye contact with kids, to say, how are you doing today, to do that with them because they really are eager for it. I stood out in the hallway the other day just greeting kids as they came into the middle school. And they come in with their heads down and their headphones on and looking at their screens.
Right.
But if there is someone standing there ready to make eye contact and talk to them, every single kid engaged. You could pull a smile out of every single kid, and it makes a huge difference. So I think as a community, as parents, as teachers, that is one of the easiest things we can do, and one of the most valuable is just every day try to counter that whole social media and screen time with that human time.
It's really a false connection, isn't it?
It
It's
is.
the idea that you're, having this true connection, but you're not making eye contact, you're not having face-to-face dialogue,
Right.
and those are the things that really we found in life as it relates to mental health in people is real-life connection you don't have with these social media outlets.
Exactly. And what it also does that I think parents don't necessarily understand is it broadens their geographic area of connection. They will connect or think they have friends with kids all over the place. When we were young, it was our neighborhood. It was our town. Kids today, our teenagers today have friends, 100 miles away that they think they know, that they've connected from somebody to somebody to somebody. So there's a larger potential for harm just because those boundaries have spread so far for teens. They're exposed to so much more. Yeah.
Yeah, and I always try to relate back to when I was a kid, which is in the Stone Age, but we won't go there. But gosh, that's the way we communicate with our friends is face-to-face. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have... I will tell you, one thing that came close to social media is the Mothers Network. Of course, in the 60s, mothers stayed at home, and I wanted to... say I was not allowed to venture out more than 2 blocks away from my house. But periodically, I'd try to fly below the radar and go to the village shopping center to pick up a Red Hot with my friends. And as soon as I got home, my mother not only knew exactly where I was, but told me the route I took to get to the village shopping center because there were people calling her, oh, by the way, do you know Billy was down as... I couldn't get any... there's no cuts from mom. No. So, but again, we didn't say hurtful things to our friends because they were there. We could see the expression on her face, and and there's the lack of human interaction that's lost today with social media, and then again. Students, what I fear about them in adolescence, that's got to be a part of their bonding. And unfortunately, sometimes at school is the only time where they do see, especially nowadays, is with sports. It's when they're not going to school, it's sports. And that sets up a whole new encounter, that, back in my day that was completely different. So let's move on to our next question with social media. And before we get on there, I'll share some things again from the CDC. CDC, in their report that was again published in 2016, they asked the question, who is at risk for school violence? It states a number of factors can increase the risk of youth engaging in violence at school. However, the presence of these factors does not always mean that a young person will become an offender. But it goes on to state, risk factors for school and youth violence include prior history of violence. And I know, Denise, specifically with you guys get together as teens and always talk about, maybe is there a problem child in someone's math class, and are they doing the same thing in history? Drug or alcohol or tobacco use. Again, sometimes these are spotted in the school and sometimes not, but, when we get into seeing students that are starting to act completely different than they normally would, whether they're reclusive or being just the opposite. Association with delinquent peers. I think I was called a delinquent peer when I was a kid, but we won't get into that. Poor family functioning, and we're going to get to that here pretty soon. That's something that they state was a definite factor. Poor grades in school, again, are an indicator that something is up. And then, again, poverty in the community. Again, we're seeing a lot of disconnects there, although some people will debate that and state that some of our impoverished communities are more well-connected than some of our higher middle-class communities. So that's my statistics here. So we'll get on to the third question. And this is probably one of the things that, from your perspectives, it's sometimes hard to see and sometimes not, but what goes on in a home. How is their interaction with their parents? Is there a dysfunctional family? Divorce is a 50% divorce rate is unbelievable. It's just, but that's reality in life. 50% of people getting married today are getting a divorce. So let's talk about that. And Todd, again, we'll start with you.
So again, not looking at trying to blame folks or, we all want to point to something and say this is the problem. We want to point to the schools and say, this is a school problem or the family. But families are a key component in mental wellness and to be able to avoid addiction. The research is resoundingly clear on that. What constitutes a family, and I want to be clear, there's several types of families that we could be talking about. Whether that's a two-parent, a single parent, grandparents, lots of ideas of what family is. There are some things that I feel like, and the literature suggests, is clear that's happening in our culture now that's adding to this. One of those things is a lack of quality family time being spent together. And I talk about this group a lot. It was in Porter County had a program that was called Around the Table. And the whole goal of Around the Table was to simply train families to eat a meal around the table and talk to one another. That was something that took place years ago, is not very common anymore because of our society wanting to run people in different directions with activities. A breakdown in communication is happening, and I think a breakdown in the family structure as a whole is also something that's adding to this. That, to me, has always been, in my clinical work, the basis for kids. You can't have a healthy kid if you've got a fractured family. And a lot of the times as adults, we come with our own issues. And so it's really helping, families and mothers and fathers to overcome some of the things they have and to set a firm, consistent structure for their kids. And unfortunately, we're missing that. Parents are more stressed than they ever have. Single parents are having to work outside the home to provide, and it leaves kids with that lack of connectedness.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the stress on the parenting end of things as well, because kids have more anxiety today because of our social climate and the media and technology, but parents do as well, and I think we forget that. While the connection seems to be suffering, parents also have more control in some ways than they ever did, because with technology they can track their child every second, every moment, and follow them and know where they are. Now think about that, Bill. When you were a teenager, what if your mom could have tracked you everywhere you were every evening? Now think about the anxiety on you and on your poor mother at that time. So
yeah, I can almost feel my mom's presence in this room right now. Yeah, Billy.
If she knew every second. And that's so the tools, the technology tools for parents are also very anxiety causing for kids, because kids really have no privacy anymore. You talked about the peer aggression and that sort of thing. If you had called somebody a name or you didn't say mean things because it was face-to-face, although people still did back then, but the only people who knew you did that were the people who happened to be right there and saw you. Today, kids have make the same mistakes, have the same developmental issues. It's normal for kids to make mistakes and relationship mistakes, but they're permanent now.
Everybody's got a cell phone.
Everybody sees it. It's recorded forever. Think about the stress and anxiety on a kid who can't just move on. So you have a 12-year-old who says something stupid like we all did, but it's recorded forever.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, one of the things that if my kids were listening here, if they were not busy at work, they would say, "Yeah, he didn't buy us cell phones till we were in college." I have one daughter, Kelly, who was threatening to call Child Protective Services because we didn't get her a convertible Mustang along with the cell phone. Those were huge child neglect issues for her. So Kelly, yeah, good luck with that. I'm still not going to buy it. She's 30 years old.
Oh, gosh.
So Stephanie, if you want to talk about that.
Yes, please. We have, when we do focus groups, we ask the kids, raise your hand. Are you involved in a church? Are you involved in, or do you know your neighbors? Do you get out and if you were to walk down the street, would you be able to call the person by name who waved to you? Do you come from a two-parent, a single family? We try to find out what the child is dealing with. And they also do have Love and Logic program, which is the type of program of the dinner and the families eating dinner together and talking, which is really important.
They have merged those.
Yes.
The Around the Table and the Love and Logic have kind of merged
right.
now.
So it is still going on, which is a great thing. And we have SAMHSA, which is a mental health substance abuse, have a program called Talk, They Hear You. And we at Porter County Substance Abuse have a lot of resources for parents, and that is a great program. There's PSAs on it. There's little commercials, there's pamphlets, and it's how the parents should not be afraid of their kids and talk to them about substance abuse, about mental health, about lots of time.
I'm going to throw this out there just because as a parent, again, when I look at our kids' lives, it was stretched. I mean, all of them were involved with athletics, band, and so on. And I don't remember it being that way when I was a kid. I remember, sports were, hey, we got together with the buds out in the back lot and we played. In fact, Sandlot, I swear someone from my neighborhood wrote that. But now it's, when we talk about, Todd, you touched upon this, when we talked about that time for communication, that time at the table. Kay Tasha, I think, is the one that part of the people that instituted that program, which I think was a great concept to bring people back to the table. But, I look at what organized sports did. Organized sports didn't happen with us unless we were, it was a school-sponsored sport. And whether it's football, track, in elementary school it was Little League baseball. But now that is yet another strain, is it not? Because everyone has to be in that sport. And that's taking away from family time. And I remember the all-star teams, and it seemed, and coaches saying, no, they've got to be on that AAU team if they're going to play. But are you seeing an impact on organized sports and students as well? Absolutely,
Bill. I think that, another major difference is those sports were community-based. So you had I grew up in Portage, so you had Portage Little League, right? And they still have those things, but what you're finding is a lot of families are being encouraged to do these traveling leagues, which take place on Saturdays and Sundays, and again, are key points where families used to connect. Are now driving long distances because the competition maybe is higher and all those different reasons, and it's creating an additional financial stress, time stress, and pressure for kids. So local sports, I think unfortunately in about another 10 years you're going to see maybe even that go away. I hope not, because it was crucial to my development. But a lot of those kids are doing these traveling leagues, and I don't know if it's a positive thing or not.
It's the pressure, and it's become big business, I think, where it used to be a community support and service for kids, and it's now become big business, and they've tapped into that. And so we are just traveling so far, and that's anxiety for kids, anxiety for parents. In addition to the sports, you've got tutoring to try and get the higher test scores, which is a whole nother topic. You could probably do a